Grand Haven Township for a residential fire at Riverside Trail. White smoke coming out of the window. House is full of smoke seen from the outside and smells electrical. Central clear at 11:46.
It's a tragedy that has unveiled the darkness of the man who investigators say caused it.
Preliminary indications are that the fire was intentionally set in numerous different places throughout the residence on the interior of the home.
Police say he killed his wife, and there's
a Reddit post Mandy Carowitz wrote in 2024 that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Not the one about the affair. The one where she says, I finally realized that I had been the only person who ever showed up for myself. 4.5 years after discovering her husband's betrayal, she was still fighting to believe she deserved better. She didn't know then that the man who'd already shattered her trust was building towards something far more permanent. I've followed this case since the first dispatch call crackled over the scanner in Grand Haven Township, and there's a gap in how it's been covered, a tendency to call it a family annihilation that came out of nowhere. But when you read every word Mandy put online, when you map the timeline of the weeks leading up to July 24th, and when you look at how this fire was set, out of nowhere, doesn't hold. What emerges instead is something methodical, something that was being rehearsed long before the smoke started showing. So let's walk through what we now know, and what I think got missed. The address was on Riverside Trail. The 911 call came in just before noon. White smoke from a window, an electrical smell. First crews established water supply and made entry. Inside, they found all 8 members of the family deceased, 2 adults, 6 children. The children ranged in age from 5 to 15. 2 of them had been adopted from China. Mandy, the mother, was 39. Christopher, the father, was 47. They'd been married, by all outward appearances, for years, raising a big, busy household. Mandy worked as a substitute teacher. Christopher was a national vice president of sales and marketing for the American Heart Association. On paper, this was a family that functioned. But paper doesn't bleed. Within hours, investigators had a critical piece of information: some of the victims had gunshot wounds. Then came the post-mortem autopsy results. Cause of death for Mandy and all 6 children, gunshot wounds. Manner of death, homicide. For Christopher, manner of death, suicide.
After the post-mortem autopsies, it was determined that the cause of death for all the subjects involved in this was ruled gunshot wounds, and the manner of death for Amanda and the 6 children was ruled homicide. The manner of death for Christopher has been ruled suicide. Additionally, after checking with the Michigan State Police Fire and Arson investigators, it was determined they're working to identify the cause and origin of the fire. We don't have that official report yet, but preliminary indications are that the fire was intentionally set in numerous different places throughout the...
And the fire. Preliminary indications. And I want you to sit with this. The fire was intentionally set in numerous different places throughout the interior of the home. That's not a single point of origin. That's someone walking room to room, ensuring no corner was left untouched. Police also said it appears the violence started the night before. The fire was lit the next morning. That gap, hours between the killings and the flames, that's not impulse, that's staging. And here's where the story pivots from horror into a pattern. Because the man who did this didn't just snap. He'd been unraveling in ways that were documented in plain sight if you knew where to look. Mandy, under the username MandyK179, posted extensively on Reddit. In 2024, she opened up in a support group for people recovering from infidelity.
Lengthy post, and I'm going to read it for you. Quote, I feel you. My WH, and it appears she's using internet slang to talk about her husband, literally cheated with a younger version of me, except way wilder than I ever was. When my H and I met, husband, I was the intern at the company we both worked for. He was divorced and older than me. Fast forward 10 years and 5 kids. He was cheating with the intern again, the same age I was when I was the intern. I was 5 babies in and actually not in bad physical shape, but I was in the trenches of little kids and just couldn't be who I was before. He had gotten a bonus literally days after D-Day, and I told him I was using it to pay off my credit card, to get Botox, Invisalign, hair extensions, and new clothes that made me feel pretty. I lost tons of weight during the aftermath, but guess what? I never felt better from those things. I still internally blamed myself for not being enough of what he wanted. After about a year of self-loathing, I remember crying and looking at myself in the mirror and realizing how up it was. I was the one who was living so miserably because of what he did. I finally realized that I had been the only person who ever showed up for myself my whole entire life. I didn't deserve to treat myself the way I had been. I decided to rewrite my brain as best as I could. I literally filled up journal upon journal upon journal with nice things about myself, even if I didn't believe them. I stopped dressing for him. I chose to dress for myself. I experimented with my natural curls and wore less makeup. I really leaned into the spiritual experience of getting to know and appreciate myself. It was the best thing I ever did for myself. Don't get me wrong, I sometimes still feel insecure. And 4.5 years out from D-Day, which appears to be the day she's talking about when she found out about this alleged affair, I still occasionally get triggers that suck me in. But my self-esteem is now able to withstand those triggers. Instead of resorting to I'm the worst, I hate myself, I now find my internal dialogue being more, I don't deserve this. Why am I still living like this type talk? She goes on to say the most ironic thing about it is that now my WH finds my self-confidence to be super attractive. I mean, I think he finds it a little scary too, because he knows that I now know I deserve better than what he gave me in the past.
She wrote that her husband, her WH wayward husband in the forum's shorthand, had cheated on her with a younger coworker. She described meeting him years earlier when she was the intern at their company. He was older, divorced. Fast forward 10 years and 5 kids later, and he cheated again. This time with another intern, the same age she'd been when they met. She wrote, I was 5 babies in, and actually not in bad physical shape, but I was in the trenches of little kids and just couldn't be who I was before. She used his bonus to get Botox, Invisalign, hair extensions, new clothes, trying to feel worthy. But she said none of it fixed the internal damage. She had to rebuild herself from the inside. That post is devastating on its own. But it's what she reveals next that changes how we should view the danger she was in. She says their therapist told Christopher directly, just know, even if things are good, this is forever a part of your spouse's psyche. Mandy wrote, even when things are good, I think of my husband's infidelity. And then the line that chills me. The most ironic thing about it is that now my WH finds my self-confidence to be super attractive. I mean, I think he finds it a little scary, too, because he knows that I now know I deserve better than what he gave me in the past, and won't tolerate any cheating in the future. Read that again. She was gaining strength. He was noticing. And it scared him. In the context of what happened, that is not a throwaway observation. That's a warning flare. Now, add the timeline. Christopher's employment with the American Heart Association ended earlier in July. We don't know why. But we do know that a man who had based a significant part of his identity on a high-level corporate role was suddenly without it. Around that same period, Mandy took their 2 adopted daughters on a trip to China, a journey likely meant to connect them with their birth culture. She was posting bucket list videos that summer, laughing about laundry, documenting family adventures. He was losing his job. She was leaning into motherhood and personal growth. He was losing control. There is no record, as of this moment, of prior domestic violence calls to that home, no restraining orders, no 911 calls for disturbance.
Yeah, and you know, even though there have been these allegations of adultery, like I haven't seen any sort of allegation of domestic violence in this marriage. You know, he worked for the American Heart Association, you know, and so in a lot of ways, like on the surface, like he was someone who seemed like, you know, though maybe they had challenges in their marriage, like from what you can see, like this does seem like it comes out of the blue, where it's, you know, earlier this week, I was talking about a case out of Oklahoma involving a woman named Sarah Gilson who lost her life, and she had filed protective orders in the past. There had been allegations of controlling behavior and domestic violence in that relationship, and people can go watch that story. You know, in so many of these cases, Randy, as you've, you know, followed along with stories over the years, like how often do you see these cases get to this point when it doesn't seem like, you know, yeah, there were some issues of infidelity potentially, but it's not like we were talking about violence in the past. And then suddenly it's a case where all of these people lose their lives, and police also say he set multiple fires in the home.
Well, on one hand, I wouldn't be surprised if we did uncover or something comes up later that there were incidents and people come out of the woodwork. But yeah, sometimes people just get to a point where they snap. You know, he's, you know, done bad things. Apparently he, you know, met her when she was much younger and she was working for him, or she was an intern and did it again. That does not equate to violence. That does not equate to an automatic, you know, mathematical formula that he would become violent. But again, maybe she saw it. Maybe that's why she stayed with him. You never know what's going on in someone's head and someone's heart. And gosh, the hard thing for all of us is, like you said, this is unpredictable. Had there been TPOs or restraining orders, not only was it predictable, but then there's somebody else to blame. The system could have protected her better. You know, the judge could have issued a harsher sentence or a more lengthy restraining order, but there's nothing like that. I mean, how? She's just rocking along being a mom, and this happens. And it's sort of, that's what's devastating to, I'm sure, everyone that knows her and everyone who loves her and all of her family.
No, and it's, you know, and for this part of the story is really.
And that's what makes this case so dangerous to misunderstand. We are trained to look for the obvious escalation. The bruises, the threats, the protective orders. But sometimes the escalation is internal. It shows up in a Reddit post about a man who finds your self-confidence a little scary. It shows up in a job loss that strips away the last external validation. It shows up in a wife who is finally, after years, believing she deserved better, planning a future that didn't center on his needs.
Joining us now to talk more about this is family law attorney Randy Kessler. There's just no words for the loss of life in this story, and obviously here on Law and Crime and in the true crime world, we're frankly often and almost always talking about loss of life, but the scale here is just, it's unimaginable, especially with the ages. You know, it's you know, you have these Reddit posts that have been reported by several media outlets having belonged to Mandy Carowitz. And she talks about infidelity back in 2024. And Christopher, you know, according to these posts, you know, was cheating on her. And then it was something that they really tried to work through. Knowing what happened last week, and you kind of see these posts, you piece together that it appears that he left his job earlier this month. What stands out to you, kind of as we're piecing together all of this?
Yeah, well, just based on what you just said, first of all, if you were to say, I want to come up with a checklist of the most sympathetic victims of a horrific crime, right? This would check all the boxes: children, faithful wife, mother, you know, a saint pretty much as far as a parent, number one. Number two, yeah, there are signals. You can never predict this, and you never want to victim blame, and you never want to say, well, things could have been different had she, but, you know, you look back at it and, gosh, so they met when she was an intern and he was much older, divorced, and then he had an affair with somebody similar to that years later. And then she said, I want to stay in the marriage for the sake of the children, which, you know, these are all things we hear all day long, but, you know, sort of like a perfect storm or death of a thousand cuts. There are all these factors that keep coming into it. Then she was talking about it, or she was talking about how to overcome it. And she was in private groups talking about, and maybe therapeutic for her, how do you survive adultery? How do you survive an affair in your relationship? All these things coming together, and his instability, you know, maybe having multiple affairs, maybe, you know, just losing his job, we don't know why. All these things come together, and it just points out one thing: human beings are unpredictable and have dark sides to them, and this, you know, deepest, darkest. And she had no idea she was, that he was like that, or she would have gotten out a lot sooner, I'm sure. She thought he was a bad guy, he cheated, he lost his job, but God knows what was going on in his mind, and unfortunately, It's a lot worse than anybody knew, especially her.
So here's where I want you to engage with me directly. I'm going to lay out the two competing ways to read what happened inside that house, and I want you to tell me which one the evidence actually supports. Option 1. This was a psychotic break. A man so destabilized by job loss and marital failure that he snapped, killed his family in a dissociative rage, then set the fire and killed himself in a final act of madness. Option 2. This was a premeditated extermination. A man who systematically shot his wife and children, waited hours, then set multiple fires to destroy evidence, and ended his own life not out of remorse, but to escape accountability. Which timeline fits the known facts? The children were found in their bedrooms. Multiple ignition points. The violence began the night before. That's not chaos. That's a checklist.
Well, and and for this part of the story is really hard it's all hard, but like this part where, all the children were found in their bedrooms according to police, so it just seems like this was, on one hand, snapping, but then at the same time, the amount of time that potentially took inside the home and then lighting fires in multiple locations where it just seems like it was a plan, a horrific plan that was played out. In a lot of these cases, because Christopher Carowitz will not be prosecuted, he will not answer to what he did because he took his own life, and there will be so many unanswered questions because of that. But typically, like, what happens now in these types of cases, knowing that so much damage was done, and yet the person that should be held accountable is no longer with us?
Well, the very slim silver lining is that we, the taxpayers, are not going to pay any money to bring justice. He did it himself, and he took care of that part of it. But, there's no other culprit. There's no other...
I think many outlets have framed this as a family man who broke under pressure. I'm not willing to give him that narrative. Because that narrative erases the planning. It erases the hours between the trigger pulls and the match strikes. And it erases Mandy's own words. Words that show she was living with a man she no longer fully trusted. A man who felt threatened by her reclaiming her worth. Now, let me man the opposing view for a moment. A defense attorney, if this case were being tried, might argue that there's no evidence of premeditation, no manifesto, no note, no search history revealed yet. They'd say the multiple fire points could be the act of a disorganized mind, someone panicking, trying to erase what he'd done in a fragmented state. They'd point to the sudden job loss as a catastrophic stressor. They'd remind us that people do, in rare cases, experience acute psychotic breaks that lead to unimaginable violence without prior warning signs. And I would respond, disorganized minds don't methodically move through a house, targeting 6 children in their bedrooms, without a single one escaping or alerting the other. Disorganized minds don't stage a fire hours after the act, then take their own life in a manner that leaves them as the sole obvious perpetrator. The fact that no note has been found yet doesn't mean one doesn't exist. And digital forensics haven't been fully reported. What will his browser history show in the days before? What will his financial records reveal? Police have already said they're pulling video evidence to build the timeline. The answers are coming.
There's no other culprit, there's no other person of interest, no other person of suspicion. But I think law enforcement has to look and see, just in case, was there anybody that knew this was going to happen, that facilitated it? I don't know that they would be culpable. If you told somebody something crazy, like one day I might just go snap and kill my family, I don't think that person would be held culpable. But the question is, how can we make sure that people like these are identified in the future and concerns like this are identified? And that's why it's good to shed some light on it. It's good that you're covering it. It's good that people are aware of it. It helps me as a family lawyer when I see the inkling of a dispute like this, and I can tell a client, this is crazy to suggest, and I'm not saying that your husband or wife is going to be like this, but be on the lookout, because every now and then you hear these stories, like this case, and I don't want to be the lawyer that didn't warn you. And I'm not saying go create a whole barrier and change the locks on your doors, but be careful. Ounce of prevention.
This is why I trust the process. Investigators have the handgun. They have the fire origin report pending from the Michigan State Police Arson Unit. They have the home's digital footprint, cell towers, devices, any cloud backups. Forensic accounting and behavioral analysis will trace the real story, not the sanitized obituary some want to write for him. And when those results come in, we will cover every detail here. I won't flinch from what they reveal. There's one specific thing I want you to examine for yourself. Go read Mandy's Reddit posts. The full ones, not just the excerpts. Look at the language she uses in the months after the affair. She writes about journaling, about rewriting her brain, about finally looking in the mirror and not hating herself. She writes about a therapist telling her husband that the infidelity would forever be part of her psyche. And she writes about him finding her new confidence. Scary. Knowing how this ended, what do you see in those posts that perhaps she couldn't see yet? That's my debate question for you in the comments. At what point does a partner's self-improvement become a threat to a certain kind of personality? And were there signals we, as a society, are not trained to read? Because here's what I can't shake. Mandy was a substitute teacher. She was taking her daughters to China. She was making summer bucket lists. She was doing the work. And in the end, the man who'd already fractured her heart took her life, and the lives of 6 children, because he could not stand the idea of a world where she was whole without him. The investigation is ongoing. The fire's cause and origin report will be finalized. The autopsies are complete, but toxicology and further digital forensics will add layers. We may never hear his voice explain the why, because he made sure
because he took his own life.
Well, there's, no prosecution that takes place. When the suspect is also deceased, there's no prosecution that takes place, but it doesn't change in the fact that we're trying to get answers for family, we're trying to get answers for the community, we're trying to get answers for our own responders, and the only way to get those answers is to do a full, fair, thorough, detailed, complete investigation. It's not always fast, but to do a fair and thorough and detailed investigation gives those answers to family, to neighbors, to the community, to the responders that went there, so that takes some time. But
we will hear from the evidence. And when we do, I'll be here. And I hope you will be too. If you or someone you know is living with a partner whose behavior is escalating from control to something more, please pay attention to that internal
going
alarm.
forward. I'm sure there are multiple steps before they get to a situation where they're talking to you when it comes to separation. But at the same time, like, it can be scary for people in a home. Like, she talks about trauma in these Reddit posts and the impact that it had on her. Like, what are the avenues people can go to? And I know on the surface it's like, oh, you just go to marriage counseling, but it's easy to say that, but it's like, how do people actually get to that point if they do find themselves in a situation? Not saying it's ever going to get to the point like what we're seeing here in Michigan, but still struggling day in and day out.
Well, this might sound, simplistic. There's that line from Billy Crystal that, the adultery wasn't the cause, it was the symptom. Adultery is rarely the actual cause. It's rare that that there's something else going on. And I'm not saying with her, but with him, that he would be open to having an affair and open to having a relationship. And if you get a divorce or if there's a separation, instead of telling the whole world this is why, because he's a horrible person, let's just figure out the relationship wasn't going to work. Why can stay between the two of you? Because these are the kind of things that happen. And for another reason, Chris, that's the other parent of your children. And they may find out one day what happened, but you don't need to go blaming. Kids are always going to love both parents, almost always. And they're going to always want to find good in both parents. So to go out and badmouth the other parent, even if you caught them doing something bad, it doesn't really help much. It might help you feel better that it wasn't me because he was cheating. So say that to yourself, say that to your therapist. But, marital problems, no reason to go tell the whole world, no reason to cause the other person to try to defend their honor or to be hurt or to snap. And again, we're not victim blaming. There was no reason in the world that she should have any responsibility for this. But
Mandy's posts show a woman who was fighting to trust herself again. Sometimes, that's the exact moment a dangerous person feels the ground shift beneath them. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 if you need to talk to someone who can help you assess your safety. The numbers on the screen. For now, the family is gone. But the truth about what led to that fire is still being assembled, piece by piece, in a forensic lab and on hard drives. This channel will follow every development. Because Mandy and those 6 kids deserve an honest accounting. Not a tidy narrative that lets the man who did this off the hook with a label like, snapped. The facts deserve better, and so do you.